Hey, what's up guys? So this video here is claimed to be by many, including myself, to be one of the more valid, I guess you could say, UFO sightings that we've seen. It's a pretty new piece of footage. It's not brand new, but it's definitely worth showing you guys. Now, for those of you who haven't seen this, what you're looking at is a camera on an aircraft controlled by the Department of Homeland Security. And a source from the DHS is said to have leaked this footage. You can find news stories about it all over. And what you're seeing here is a UFO which is said to have been flying at an estimated speed of 90 miles per hour underneath the water of the ocean, which is in the background. After which point it exits the water and flies over this airport going at about 120 miles an hour. At which point it splits into two objects, which I've never seen a bird or a drone or a set of balloons be able to do. I don't think I've ever seen any balloons that can travel at 90 miles per hour underneath the ocean. But again, this is a very interesting piece of footage, and it is confirmed by the US government to be a valid UFO sighting. They don't know what it is. The former head of the British government's UFO project, Nick Pope, said that the footage was very fascinating, assuming that the video isn't a clever hoax, which it looks like it's not. It's a very interesting piece of footage, and it's the kind of footage that gets the experts excited. So this is a thermal video, once again, taken by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, and yeah, it's definitely worth taking a look at. So we wanted you guys to see it. Let us know what you guys think. I'd love to hear it down in the comments. Contact us. You can find all that info down in the video description, and stay tuned for much, much more. So once again, great piece of footage. Tell us your thoughts on it, and we'll see you soon.
A little bit to the Big Bang Theory, which of course is that somewhere back in countless ages, the energy of the universe kind of scrunched up and went and created matter, and it sparked an explosion, which then threw out all of the things that became the galaxies and the planets and all like that. And of course, we've all been taught about the Big Bang Theory, right? Well, even the Big Bang Theory is now being called into question. So what we think we know, we don't really know. We also know that going back into the 80s, I have mainstream newspaper clips, and here's one from just 2013 where they are discovering new worlds out there. It's really wild because all of my life, and a lot of you guys are about my age or so, and you may remember all the science fiction movies of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and they're talking about rocket ships and blah, blah, and going to other worlds and aliens. And do you realize it was not until the late 1990s, I think about 1999, that they finally, science confirmed that there might have been another planet out there somewhere, okay? And but now, of course, we know that there's, in the words of the late Carl Sagan, there's billions and billions of them out there, right? So, how do we know about all this stuff, and how do we know about our own solar system and how it was formed? And I would direct you to the Sumerian tablets that predate the Bible by thousands of years. And probably we can know more about the ancient Sumerians than we'll ever know about the ancient Egyptians or Greeks, because the Egyptians, the Greeks, they wrote things down on papyrus and scrolls that were destroyed in wars, burned up, degenerated, fell apart. The Sumerians would etch their writings in cuneiform onto clay tablets and then bake them. There's about 500,000 of them still in existence. So where are they? They're scattered in museums around the world, probably buried in the basement or up in the attic somewhere. And only about half of these have been translated. And then I don't have to tell you about the squabbles and the controversies that goes on over the translations. Just to make a quick point, I was reading all of Zachariah Sitchin's material for years, and I agree with those who say I'm not supporting 100% everything he says and all of his translations or all of his interpretations, but I think in general he's onto it. There's a fellow named Michael Heisman who has tried to say that no, he doesn't know what he's talking about because he never, in the Sumerian tablets, they never even mentioned the word Anunnaki. Well, I went back to the material in Oxford in England of the original translations of the Sumerian, and I found out all the way through there they're talking about the Ananu gods, Enki, Enlil, and apparently Sitchin and others have simply pluralized it and said we'll call them the Anunnaki. So to say that the guy's full of hogwash just because he used the word Anunnaki instead of the Ananu gods, I think is kind of a stretch. And I think it seems to be there's an agenda there. And you're going to see this agenda all through this presentation, hidden history, things they don't want us to know about. So the ancient Sumerian tablets, what did they tell us? Well, they tell us that, by the way, as you can see here on one of their ancient steels, they had already a pretty good conception of our solar system and of the proper proportions of the planets. How in the world they knew that? Because Neptune was only discovered in 1846, and they didn't know about Pluto until 1930. And yet they've got it all down these thousands of years ago. To me, this is really strong evidence that they were doing more than stargazing. Okay, according to the Sumerian tablets, the original solar system, there was Mercury, and then there was Venus, and then there was this planet called Tiamat. I take it back. There was Mercury, Venus, Mars, and then this big watery planet called Tiamat. And according to the Sumerian scribes, this is the way the solar system then looked at that time. And but they talk about the war in the heavens and the fact that there was another planet up there, Nibiru, the planet of the crossing, as it's called. And this is because Nibiru is on an elliptical orbit that takes it far outside of our solar system, and it comes around. Several of the scholars believe it. They were counting up to be about 3,600 years. Every 3,600 years, it comes back through our solar system, and dragging along a few moons, and no telling what kind of space trash. And every time that happens, then it impacts the Earth one way or another. Again, we're back to these newspaper clippings where they feel like that there is another planet out there. We can't see it because it's way out in the dark, and it's on out past Pluto. But just more and more, they say, yeah, there's something out there. And one of the ways they know this is because of the perturbations in the orbits of the outer planets. So Nibiru comes swinging through, and one of the moons smacks Tiamat. It destroys half the planet, just turns it into rubble. And this rubble, though, continues in the orbit of Tiamat. And this is what we now know as the asteroid belt. Well, what happened to the other half of Tiamat, this giant watery planet? Well, according to the tablets, it was bounced over past the orbit of Mars and went into orbit there, and then over millions of years coalesced into the Earth. And this is why, I don't know if I have a slide here, but so now we get the solar system as we know it now. I didn't have the slide, but some of you who keep up with scientific information probably are well aware that they found all kinds of traces of Martian life in meteorites and rocks and things here on the Earth. And there's even a theory that life on Earth began because we were seeded here from Mars. But I think the Sumerian explanation of Tiamat, the watery planet, bringing all of this water and one-celled organisms, et cetera, and then coalescing into the Earth also explains the Earth. Also explains why half the Earth is water. You've got, when I was a kid, we were taught the moon pulled away from the Earth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about that too. Now, we know that we've got some strange moons in our solar system. Early on, Carl Sagan, along with some Russian scientists, were convinced that Phobos, one of the moons of Mars, was an artificial object. And as he said, a natural satellite cannot be a hollow object. So remember that, because we're going to get back to hollow object when we get to our own familiar satellite, the moon. Here is Iapetus, which really just fascinates me. This is a close-up from one of the space probes. And it's got this wall or ridge all around the thing, you know. I don't know about you, but it reminds me of Kong Island. You got King Kong on one side, everybody else on the other, but it's a very odd place. And also you notice the comparison, it looks eerily like the Death Star from Star Wars. And then when the sun's just right, it's also known as the yin-yang planet, because look, it forms the ancient symbol for yin and yang. Isn't that interesting? Now we've got our own moon, which is pretty odd. And we could spend a whole session on this, but I'm going to just try to get through it pretty easy. When one of the lunar modules was cut loose and fell back onto the moon, NASA officials announced that the moon vibrated and rang like a bell for like 8 hours or something like that, which would indicate that it's maybe hollow. And of course, when I was a kid in school, we were taught the moon's just this dead, airless world, maybe some volcanic activity, but no water, no magnetic field, nothing like that. And now we know it's quite the opposite. There is no volcanic activity, and this is really interesting because I don't think I have the slide, but I have some newspaper clippings of Armstrong and the guys that were going to land on the moon. And the day before, they reported back that they had seen a bright light emanating from I think it's Aristarchus crater. And this actually made it into the mainstream news media because at that time they were saying, well, there's volcanic activity there. And of course, after we got there, we found out there is no volcanic activity. So what's making the bright light in the crater? And of course, that nobody ever answered that because we don't talk about that. Originally, the idea was, and I was taught, that the moon tore away from the Earth. And that's what created the giant hole, which is now the Pacific Ocean. But when we got to the moon, we found out that the mineral composition is nowhere near that of rocks on the Earth. So, in other words, it came from somewhere else. And let me see if we've got a... So now the latest theory is the big whack, you know, and this is really interesting because now they're saying, well, somebody came through, a body came through and struck the Earth and broke up and created the moon, which sounds very similar to what the Sumerians were trying to tell us, right? And the big whack, of course, explains supposedly the anomalies on the moon. I love that word, anomalies. That's a scientific expression for WTF. We got things like the shard. We don't know what this is, but it juts a mile above the moon's surface and is photographed. And my little clumsy fingers are kind of bad, but, well, I don't know if you can see it. There's the shard. And don't worry about that. There's some little marks up in here. Don't worry, those are registration marks. The key thing is the shard. We don't know what this is, but it appears to be artificial. Now we've got all these shots coming from NASA photographs that are really fascinating. We've got this cigar-shaped object jutting out over a crater. We've got another cigar-shaped object apparently flying across the surface of the moon. You can actually see the shadow under it. So there's stuff going on the moon, our own nearest world that we're not being told about and we don't really know about. I love this one too. This is another NASA photo. And you can see what appears to be like maybe a big round boulder that rolled off of this crater. Oops, get back. This crater over here. And of course, this is all blown up and it's a slide. But in the original photograph that I've seen, the tracks not only roll down this side of the crater, but they come up the inside of the crater. So now wait a minute, I can understand a natural object maybe coming loose and rolling down the crater, but how do you roll up a crater if you don't have any motive power? And then you look up above, I don't know if this thing's even working, there we go. Right up here, see, and you can see some more tracks. And the bottom ones kind of look like treads. The top one looks like tire tracks or something. And these are not just exceptions. These are the rules. Because there was, when I prepared my book, Alien Agenda, I studied a NASA publication that was put out in the late 60s, but before we went to the moon. And it was all about moon anomalies. And they traced all this back into the times of Kepler and Galileo and the very first telescopes. And since that time, there have been people who have seen structures, have seen lights moving, have seen clouds of something moving across the moon. So we don't even know about our own closest body. And of course, then, as I mentioned about occult and the moon eclipsing the sun, the moon is at just the right distance from the Earth that when it eclipses the sun, it completely covers the corona of the sun. All right, so now keeping that in mind, and then you try to figure out, well, where did the moon come from? One side of the moon is heavier than the other side. It's got a denser layer, okay? And it's got matter and material, rocks on there that predate the moon and the Earth. The Earth is, I forget now, I think it's about 8 billion years old, they say. And some of these rocks they found were like 10 and 12 billion years old, according to their best estimate. So, what do we got here? We got a body coming through space, and you got bugs on the windshield. All right? It's picking up stuff as it's going through space, which accounts for the fact that one side of the moon is heavier. So here's the Earth. Here comes the moon. Goes past the Earth. It's caught in the gravitational field, and it comes back. Okay, I can see that. Now, so we should have a moon that's in a elliptical orbit and kind of wobbling around as it's captured and put into orbit around the Earth. But that's not what we have. We have a body that's in almost a near perfect circular orbit right around the equator of the Earth. And it's stationary. One side's always facing the Earth. Whoa. And it's at just the proper distance to cover the corona of the sun when there's an eclipse. How can that be? Isaac Asimov, famous astronomer and science fiction writer, he said the moon shouldn't be where it is. But it is. And this leads to our circular thinking, see, because we all know there's no such thing as aliens. But we know the moon's been around forever, and we know then somebody must have parked it there to be in this kind of position, but we know it wasn't us, and we know there's no such thing as aliens, so we just won't talk about it. On the moon, they claim to have found pyramids. Now I think we're beginning to get to the truth of some of this stuff. Because also on Mars, in the Cydonia region, you have pyramids. Pyramids seems to be a common structure.
Was that a real photo that went prior to this?
The moon? Yeah. No, I think that was an illustration. And then, of course, we get to our own planet, and we got all these anomalies. I won't get into all of them, but up here you've got obviously a manufactured axe that's found in rock sediment that's like 1 million years old. You've got handprints in this rock. You've got these round balls of Guatemala. They're perfectly round. You all know about the crystal skulls and how odd they are. The vitrified fortresses in Scotland. The Baghdad battery, okay, that shows that they were able to generate a little bit of electricity even back at the time of the Sumerians. But the common theme throughout all of this is flight. If there's pyramids on the moon and Mars, if there's artificial things on the moon and on Iapetus and on Phobos, then somebody's traveling around the universe. Then you go and check out every ancient culture on the world. And the common denominator is they talk about the gods that came from the sky. And they're flying around. Now, I think you can understand today, if somebody with a jetpack comes and lands in your front yard, you're just going to go, hey, who the hell are you? Okay? No big deal, because you know man can fly. But you got to understand, in 1906, when the Wright brothers flew, and here's a little inside story on the news media, the New York Times, who had reporters at Kitty Hawk, refused to run the story because their science editors told them man can't fly. There's no such thing as heavier than air flight. You just can't do it. And it was more than a year after the flight at Kitty Hawk that the New York Times, our newspaper of record, finally got around to telling people that it worked. And that was only after that the French invited the Wright brothers over to Europe, and they took their flying machine over there and they flew it all around. And it made the European media, and they made a big deal about it. And finally, this staid old New York Times says, well, okay. And they finally ran the story. So see, there's so much going on, and we don't get told about it. But flight all over the world, from the ancient Vedas, the flying dragons of the Chinese, the flying boats of the Egyptians, the flying shields of the Romans, and they're all talking about this. So, hey, something's going on, all right? This is not something that just started in 1947. You've got other oddities like the Antikythera mechanism, which they found on a sunken Greek galley back in the early 1900s, and they couldn't figure out what it was. It was all kind of crusted over and everything, but since then they've cleaned it up. They looked in there. There's all these little gears and all kinds of things. It's a computer. It's an astrological computer. And then down in Colombia, you've got these little trinket things that everybody says, oh, they're made out of gold, by the way. And of course, we all know about the importance of gold. And they say, well, these are just bees or some kind of insect, and just a stylized thing, you know. But some Germans got together and built a model, and guess what? It flew just fine. It's a flying airplane is what it is. So we've got all of this evidence lying all around the world that nobody's paying any attention to except us. And that brings us then to the question of Atlantis. And of course, Atlantis, the idea that there was this great civilization somewhere that got destroyed and predates our own history. The argument now is, where was Atlantis? And you get arguments that say it was a big island in the middle of the Atlantic. You've got ruins found off the coast of Cuba. They say, no, it's down near Bimini. Down at the bottom, you see the star. There's one theory that says Atlantis was actually Antarctica before there was a pole shift, and that the Earth tilted and it froze over, and that's where it was. And of course, you got more conventional people saying, no, it was the island of Santorini before a big volcano exploded, and no, it was the island of Cyprus. There's even one theory that said, oh, no, it was in the South China Sea. All right, and of course, then you get into the competing ancient mythological things of Atlantis and Mu and all of these places. And frankly, folks, I think we're dealing with the blind men and the elephant. If you remember that story, they sent the blind men and the elephant to the zoo because they all wanted to experience the elephant. So they got there, and one of them grabbed him around the leg, and he said, oh, the elephant's like a big post. And the other one had his tail, and he said, no, it's like a rope. And the other one had his nose, and he said, no, it's like a big hose. Another one had his ear. He said, no, it's like a big fan. Another one's pressing on his side and said, no, the elephant's like a wall. They were all right, but they were all wrong. It was more than all of that. And for my money, I think we are dealing with that there was a planet-wide civilization, very highly sophisticated, using technologies that we're only just now becoming aware of, much less understanding. And that what happens here is you have these scientists fighting over Atlantis, and they all have a piece of it. And unfortunately, that's all we've been left is pieces. And then it gets worse than that, because as we go on, you're going to find out these pieces are being hidden from you. They're doing everything they can to keep you from knowing about all of this prehistory, because knowledge is indeed power. You've got these giants bones, and I've got a whole bulging file on stories from the 1800s where they were discovering huge giant bones. And when I say giant, some of them are kind of normal giant, and some of them are really giant. And of course, you can find pictures like this on the internet, and of course, the naysayers will tell you, well, they're all phony. They're all just doctored photographs. And I'm sure that some of them probably are, but not all of them. We see. You got David and Goliath, so you got ancient stories of giants. You got this tall cowboy guy, whoever he is, from that probably looks like the 20s or 30s. And then you got these modern people. And so, hey, giants are not that big a deal. They're here. But, of course, we're talking about really immense people. And, again, you've got all these stories dating all the way back about giants that are found. And so what happens to them? Well, it seems like that invariably the Smithsonian Institution shows up and collects it all up, and then it just kind of like disappears into a black hole. It's not there. We don't know what happened to all of that. And we're not only talking about giant bones found in the Middle East, but South America, Central America, the Middle West, the Midwest. There were Indian mounds found, and there were apparently giant people here living in North America. And again, you've got some of these pictures, and some of them are kind of questionable, like the guys with the skull. But then you've got the fella up here showing this bone that he's found, and I think that one's probably legitimate. And again, what you have to understand about the Smithsonian is that you probably know it as the world's foremost archaeological repository, the center of science, which is true. But what you don't know is is that it is an arm of the United States government. The government owns the Smithsonian and has since the late 1800s. In the Phoenix Gazette of 1909, it gave a very detailed story of Egyptian artifacts found in the north end of the Grand Canyon. And it even goes into great detail about how the Smithsonian was called in and that they built huge platforms and put cranes on there, and they lifted out of these caves these Egyptian artifacts. And of course, how does that fit in with our known history? And it doesn't. Okay, but then again, now you go to the Smithsonian and say, well, what about all those finds in 1909? And they say, what finds? We don't know anything about that. That never happened. And yet, even today, you go to the north end of the Grand Canyon, you go find out there's pretty good sections up there that are now barred to visitors. You're not supposed to go in there. They say, oh, well, danger of cave-in, or, you know, maybe the river's a little too wild. So you can't go there, and yet they've got names like the Tower of Set, the Tower of Ra, the Horus Temple, the Osiris Temple, and the Isis Temple. That's, whoa, where did these names come from if there was nothing to this story about Egyptian artifacts in the Grand Canyon? I was pretty fascinated to find out about the Osirian. How many of y'all are aware of the Osirian? Not very many? Okay. Well, I wasn't either, so don't feel bad. I don't know if you can see this, but this stupid little thing's not really working. Up here at the top, way up here, that is Seti's temple at Abydos in Egypt. Okay, so I went to Seti's temple. I was real interested in that and seeing what they had going there. And one of the attendants said, well, have you seen the Osirian? I said, whoa, what's that? Well, out behind Seti's temple and buried way down is the Osirian, which is this series of finely cut stone blocks, intricately laid upon each other. It's another one of these cases where they are so finely cut that they just fit right together so closely that you really can't even put a piece of paper in there between them. And as far as I could tell, there was no mortar. Yes, sir.
May I make a comment?
Mm-hmm.
I was there a few years ago. My guide, Bob, took me to the temples above, and I said, I want to see the Osirian. He said, what's that? This is a guy who's trained in Egypt to be a guide.
Right.
I said, it's just down there. He said, no, we don't want to go there. Let's go on. I said, no, I want to see this. We walked down there. He was amazed.
He had not even seen it.
He didn't know about it. He was amazed.
His guide in Egypt had not even heard about it. Well, and that's the thing. I was very fortunate because when I was there, it was an exceptionally dry period, and the Osirian actually had, I don't know if you can see it on this one, see where the little door is and it looks real dark down there? That's because there's probably a little bit of water standing there. Usually it's underwater. But the time I was there, there we go, some other pictures of it. And there's a crudely built wooden ladder leading down to it, but they had 2x4s across it to block. You know, you weren't supposed to go down there. But in Egypt, a little bakshish will get you through, you know. And the guy actually pulled the 2x4s off so we could go down there and look around. And while we're down there, another of the guards shouted and came over and said, you can't be here. And we paid him a little bakshish. And we kept going and shooting some photographs. And then finally we hear a big angry shout. And here's probably the head guard. And he's got a machine gun. So I listened to him. He said, you can't be down there. And I think he was just mad because he didn't get the bakshish, you know. So they ran us out of there. But that's the whole deal. And just like the gentleman said, they don't want to even acknowledge it's there. Because it obviously is not built by the Egyptians. And that means there was somebody there with some real sophisticated equipment and knowledge, architectural skills before the Egyptians. And that's the thing you have to realize, why there's such a controversy. You may have heard John Anthony West last night talking about the water erosion on the Great Pyramid and on the Sphinx, and the fact that there's such an argument and disagreement between the geologists who say, yeah, it was here 12,000 years ago, and the Egyptologists that go, oh, no, your dating's all wrong. And I'll tell you what the deal is. Without the ancient culture of Egypt and all that mythology, Egypt is a dirt poor third world nation. So Egyptology, the ancient Egyptians and, pharaohs and Queen Cleopatra and the whole schmear, that's their bread and butter. And I understand this, but it's not right. It's not the truth. And of course, I'm sure you've seen the technology that they were using, these tubes connected to the Jed pillar, which was their source of power, with a cord. And you got these little things, and they've got what looks like a snake in there, but I think that's just representing energy. And the one at the top's the photograph, the complete drawing's over here, and it's tough to get a view of these because let me tell you something, this is not at one place. I saw at least 3 or 4 of these same engravings, but they're always in a narrow little hallway, and you can't really get back to get. You have to really going to have a good camera and some good knowledge of photography to be able to get a shot of it. You're going to love this one. We were in Sekhmet's tomb. Those hands are my wife, Carol, and she's shorter than I am. So she's holding her camera up over her head, trying to get a picture of the little statue of Sekhmet. And I want to tell you something. I'm not the most touchy-feely person in the whole world, show me, set it afire, see what it does. I don't know. And yet, I want to tell you something. In this Sekhmet's tomb, I was even impacted by the energy that is in that place. So Carol was trying to take a picture, and she said, "Hey, it sucked all the energy out of my camera." Said, "It won't work." And that camera never worked again the rest of the trip. Okay, and I thought, yeah, Sekhmet sucked your energy. That sounds like a joke, But we get home, and one of the other people that were with us sent me this photograph. They were behind Carol, and they took this photograph at the exact moment that you can see this energy trail trailing away from her camera. Now, those of you who know about photography, you know that if there was a light source on the camera and it was started up way up here and you pull it down, then yeah, you could get a streak on there, But she never got higher than that. That's the energy being sucked out of her camera. It's amazing. Here's an ancient gate outside a Giza wall, and you notice a little figure on top. Kind of looks eerily like a small alien gray, right? By the way, after I came back and started talking about this gate, they took it down, and I hope they didn't destroy it. You got places like Karnak, thousands of these stones over in France. And see, you've probably never heard of this. There's just all these weird places. Baalbek, that's a good one too. And if you study Sitchin's material, he has said that these ancient tablets talk about Baalbek as basically the point where these Anunnaki gods came and went. And so the theory is these huge stones down here were a platform, a landing platform for craft. And the bigger stones on top, and then the wall over here, they built a Roman city on top of this. So for the longest time, everybody thought that the Romans had made all this, but the Romans had no way of dealing with rocks of stones of that size. Here's an obelisk that they had quarried but never got placed in position. And you can see the size of it with all these people. And I noticed the other night at the panel, they were talking about the giant rocks and our giant blocks of stone, and do we have the means to lift things like that today? And so when I was writing my book, Our Occulted History, I really dug into that. And here's what I found out. There are perhaps today 2 cranes in the world. I think one of them's in Britain and another one's in Europe, that might be capable of lifting 100 tons rocks or whatever. But here's the clincher. Neither one of them are mobile. They can lift things, but they can't move them anywhere. And these stones at Baalbek, and just like Stonehenge and just like other places, they were quarried miles away. So lifting them's one thing. You can always argue that you roll them up on rollers and, keep running around with logs and get 2,000 people pushing on it and maybe moving around somewhere, but can you lift it? And even if you can lift it, can you move it somewhere? So we're right back where we started from, mysteries. Now, some of you know about Ed Lichtenstein's the Coral Castle in Florida. Y'all know about that? Okay, well, you ought to look into that. That's a fascinating thing. He was an old guy, and he, by himself, built this huge exhibit out of these huge stones that he would carve out and then place in these various positions. And nobody ever could tell how he did that. And the closest thing we have is that some kids were playing nearby at one time when a truck came and delivered some of these giant stones. And Ed told the drivers and said, go get some lunch and come back after lunch. And they did. And while they were gone, the kids said they saw him and he had what looked like ice cream cones in his hand, little conical objects, And when the guys came back after lunch, all this stuff was out of the truck and up, And the only clue we have as to what old Ed was up to is that he did say one time that he knew the secrets of the ancient Egyptians. And so then you get things like the Coral Castle. And then I was also flabbergasted to learn about the giant heads on Easter Island. Okay, and we've all know about those, and they also already have caused so much controversy and so much wonderment because, those huge heads, and you have a primitive people there whose, I guess their basic tools were deer antlers or stones or something, a stick, and they've carved these giant heads and placed them in there. But then I found out that there's bodies under there. It's not just the heads. You got a huge body down there that's sometimes 2 and 3 times bigger, longer than the head. Now, how come we don't hear more about that? Well, because on somebody's orders, when they excavated these things, they came back in and filled them back in. They don't want you to know that there's this stuff going on. And when you go home and tell all your friends and or neighbors and or relatives, okay, they're going to go, what? They're not even going to believe you because they never see this stuff. Göbekli Tepe, I won't go into too much of that because I think my friend Linda Howe took care of some of this. But that's, again, a fantastic place dating back 12,000 years with intricate designs and all kinds of things. They call it the Turkish Stonehenge. And it predates Stonehenge by 7,000 years. Well, hey, that alone leaves out the Egyptians, right? Because the Egyptians only go back 5,000 years. And their intricate carvings, etchings, and keep in mind, Göbekli Tepe is just now being excavated and studied. We know about all the strange skulls found all around the world, particularly in South America. And then that got me to thinking, because I know at one time I was at the Charlottenburg Castle there in Berlin and actually saw the real Nefertiti. And, oh, my God, it is beautiful. It is incredible. And, of course, she's got this high hat on, like so many of them did. And it makes you wonder if perhaps these high conical hats and, the thing like the popes wear now is ceremonial, but they used to wear those all the time. Was this to cover up their tall, non-human skull? And, of course, some of the late Lloyd Pye. Yeah. Thank you, and he definitely deserves your applause because good old Lloyd, boy, he stuck right to it. He fought all the way to the end, trying to show that his skull was non-human. In fact, I don't want to get too conspiratorial, but I couldn't help but wonder that, it seems like he was just about on a breakthrough there to prove that this was a non-human, or at least partially non-human skull, and then he died of cancer. So it definitely raises the issue of, did we come from somewhere else? And again, not only is there evidence all around the world of flying machines and people flying through the air, but you've got all these carvings and drawings and everything else that just, quite frankly, do not appear to be human. And being a kind of a cartoonist artist, I mean, I can understand taking liberties with the human figure and making cartoony type things, but generally you try to stick with what you know, and these things are just pretty unusual. So this shows that there has been visitation. There's been beings here on this planet. And of course, we all remember 2001 Space Odyssey and how that, so the concept, actually, the idea that mankind has been pulled up by his bootstraps and kicked along is actually not very new. We've kind of figured this out for a long time. We just didn't know the who's, whys, and wherefores, and I think we're getting that with the Sumerian tablets. Even show them in cartoons now, you know. Say, boy, they're going to get a kick out of this. And, you know, I have thought about that. Have you thought about this? You know, 1,000 years from now, you got somebody digging around here, and they find a Coke bottle. What's this? Obviously, some kind of ancient artifact alluding to the feminine goddess. We don't know what we don't know. So the story in the Sumerian tablets seems to be more and more true, and basically, again, we find that they say that 432,000 years ago, and that's being kind of particular. I'm not sure I'd put that fine a date on it. Could be anywhere from 300,000 to 500,000. But something happened, and somebody came here, and things started happening. And they even tell you how that they created this worker race. They took the seed of an Anunnaki male, and they impregnated the egg of an Anunnaki female, and then she carried it to term, and then they, by cesarean section, they delivered what they call the Adama, the Adam, the first human, the earth man. And I think that it's pretty obvious that there's been intervention somehow or another. But the thing I want to stress on you, and I want you to stress on your friends and our relatives, is that nobody's saying that that aliens created us. They didn't create us. Okay, they simply improved the breed, just like we do with horses and sheep, and cows and dogs and cats. Okay, except instead of breeding like we do with animals, or have up till recently, they actually went in and manipulated the DNA and created their Adama, their Adam, their worker race. And interestingly enough, according to those tablets, they had the same ethical arguments that we're having. And some of them were saying, well, it's not right for us to, we're not God. We can't play God. We can't create anything. It's not up to us to create life. And their science officer, Inky, he argued, well, we're not creating anything. We're just improving the breed. And we need these workers to do all the drudge work. And we need to cut down on the work shortages and strikes and stuff, because all these Anunnaki, they said, hey, we signed up to be astronauts. We didn't sign up to be gold miners and digging in the dirt. So that argument finally won out, and they said, okay, we're gonna create this race. And so by tweaking the DNA, they came up with modern man. And then you all heard Michael Tellinger talk about these circles in Africa. Here's some of them that I'll show you, so we'll kind of zip on through this. I even believe, I really do, I'm beginning to really agree with Tellinger that they probably have discovered Inky's African laboratory. They're at this place they call Adam's Calendar, because it matches the descriptions that we find in the ancient Sumerian tablets, and it clearly said that his laboratory was in the Abzug, which has been translated to be Africa. This is really fascinating to me. They're in the, most of them are in the exact configuration of a magnetron, which is what you use to generate energy. And I was really fascinated that when they went 600 feet down, they found the average temperature outside the circles was 42 degrees Fahrenheit, But inside the circles, it went up to 136 degrees. So these circles somehow, just by their geometric configuration, are generating energy and power. And we need to figure this out so we can stop burning fossil fuel and killing ourselves with nuclear energy. The Great Pyramid, this Dr. Michael Barth from Drexel University, he says that that the Great Pyramid is not even made out of limestone. It just appears to be limestone, but it's actually a poured geopolymer concrete. Now, this brings up a whole new theory about creation of these pyramids, because the big argument is, how could these Egyptians drag all these huge stones through the desert, and how could they pile them up and make them into such perfect pyramids? Well, maybe they didn't. Maybe they just built forms and poured it. That could explain this. It also could explain why that some of these, I think last night they were talking about a pyramid that they found buried, and that they didn't know what it was made out of. Maybe it was made out of this polymer. But again, we find that the common denominator are these pyramids all around the world. Mexico, China. This photograph down here was taken about the time of World War II by pilots flying over China. Today, they got trees planted on it, and they're trying to act like, no, that's just a hill. And of course, we know about the crop circles, and some of them get really weird, like this one right here at Showbotham, which seemed to be a response to, on the right, we have a binary code message that was sent from Puerto Rico in 1974, and without trying to get into too much detail, it gave a DNA breakdown. It shows down here, you see a figure of a human that says we kind of look like this. Right below that, you see the little kind of brownish objects. That represents the solar system with the big sun, and then Mercury, Mars, and then you can see the one lifted up above. That represents we're here. We're on the third planet from the sun. We're from the Earth. So in 2001, we get this, looks like a copy of this Puerto Rico message back, except it's a little bit different. It's got different DNA sequence. I don't know why this thing's not working. And then where you see the human, you see something with a great big head and a little bitty body. It kind of looks like a deal. And then over here you see their solar system, and they're on the fourth, fifth, sixth planet, seventh planet. They really spread out over there. And apparently they are trying to send us a message. And of course, this hit and went away. Unless you know about it, unless you're a pack rat like me and keep files, you just forget about it or don't ever know about it. And then they send us this face that is done in the crop. And it looks fairly human. I don't know. Nobody's certain on whether they're trying to say we look like this or, hey, this is what you look like. You know. But they also like this one. That was this was 2002. Again, you have a very alien-looking face with a binary code message, and the message says, "Beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain, but still time. Believe there's good out there. We oppose deception. Conduit closing." Whatever that enigmatic message means. You can make what you want to out of that, but here we are, folks. There's people, they're here, they've been here all along, they're still here, and this is what we're dealing with. So this really, I think, pretty much answers the question, did our ancestors come from space? Yes, and because we see evidence that they were not only on the Earth, but in our whole solar system. Well, now the question is, well, did they all leave at some point? Or at least some of them still here? How do we answer that? Well, you go look at the historical record. If the historical record is, as we were taught, just a slow evolutionary climb from hunter-gatherers to cave people to farmers to city-states to empires, you know, then that ought to be the historical record and that's it. But no, what we find is that throughout history, from the Vedas, from the Sumerian tablets, from the Bible, Ezekiel, the fiery wheel, King Nebuchadnezzar and his fiery furnace, his little gold thing where somebody appeared, okay? We've got evidence of alien manipulation and presence here all throughout our written history. So that means that at least some of them are still here.
Over the last 30 years, there have been thousands of reported sightings of unidentified flying objects over the British Isles.
My first thoughts were, wow, what was that?
You think I'm bloody daft, but this is a UFO.
In the summer of 2008, reports of flying saucers and other crafts were capturing the headlines again. Over the years, numerous eyewitnesses, including military personnel, police officers, and experienced airline pilots have testified to seeing strange lights in the sky and other mysterious phenomena.
Marble clock, very bright yellow object.
It was nothing like an airplane that I'd ever seen before.
It's the brightest light I've ever seen in my life.
We could offer no explanation.
Many of these UFO sightings remain unexplained to this day. But what or who were they? Could they really be evidence of extraterrestrial life?
I thought, what's that? I couldn't believe my eyes.
Tonight, we hear firsthand from those who witnessed them and examine the truth behind some of Britain's most celebrated UFO sightings. At the beginning of 1980, Todmorden was a little-known West Yorkshire mill town. But before the year's end, the town would be associated with one of the strangest stories in British UFO history.
For something you've only read about or seen on television, and suddenly, it's there. If you think of a double-decker bus sideways, that's how big it was.
And he wasn't the sort of person that would suddenly say something, you know, that hadn't happened. So I believed him.
I felt quite safe in the police car. Now if somebody got out of it, I'd be bloody scared.
The story of a young Yorkshire police officer's sighting of an unidentified object became headline news.
I believe Alan Godfrey's telling the truth. If he's lying, he deserves an Oscar.
Almost 30 years later, his experience has become part of UFO folklore.
I've been a journalist for 50 years and covered quite a few rather strange stories. But the Alan Godfrey story is undoubtedly the most astonishing thing I ever covered.
In 1980, Alan Godfrey had been a police officer in the Todmorden area for 6 years. On the night of the 28th of November, he claims to have witnessed something extraordinary.
We got radio messages from our control room that people were reporting seeing a small herd of cows roaming around a local council estate. And as I'm going up Burnley Road, I could see in the distance, about 500-600 yards up the road, something that had skidded. I thought it was a staff bus that had skidded across the road for some reason. Whatever it was, I decided to go and investigate. So I'm driving towards this object, and I got within about 20 yards, and there it was. An object, nuts and bolts, hovering above the road surface. It was shaped in a diamond shape, and the bottom flange was rotating. The top half appeared to be stationary. I didn't know what to do. I mean, what would you do? Well, if it were you, you'd probably ring the police up. But in my case, I'm already there, so I thought I'd radio our control room.
Alpha Foxtrot 203 to control.
Now with 2 radios, we've got a VHF, which is the car radio, and UHF, which is the personal radio. I tried both, and none of them had worked.
Come in, control.
It was eerily silent. That really does stick in my mind, that was really eerily silent. And for some reason, I don't know why, I picked my clipboard up and started to draw it. I made a quick sketch. So it's there. Rather than my head, it's there, it's black and white.
Although he'd made a sketch, Alan Godfrey's story would ultimately centre around what happened next.
Now with black and white. And I'm at the other side of it, driving. Quick glance at mirror, it's not there. I got out of the car. The road surface was whirlpool dry, like a spinning object would make, you know, with all these leaves and branches and what have you. You could see an area of road surface that wasn't like the other. The others were wet, this was dry.
Unsure of what had happened to him, PC Godfrey drove straight back to the police station in Todmorden.
When Alan came into the police station, he was very agitated.
I says to him, you'll never guess what I've just seen, you know. You won't believe what I've just seen.
At first, you know, you think it's totally outrageous, you know, but I've no reason to doubt him. I mean, I've known him for a long time, and we know each other really well, and I've no reason to doubt what he said.
But the night still had one more surprise left. As Alan Godfrey ended his shift, he noticed something else he couldn't explain.
There was approximately 30-35 minutes missing that couldn't be accounted for. For me leaving the police station to coming back. To me, I'd only been away 15 minutes. By the hand, I'd been away approximately 45-50 minutes.
What Alan Godfrey claimed to have experienced was strange enough, but he wasn't alone in witnessing unusual phenomena that night. On the night of the 28th of November 1980, Police Constable Alan Godfrey was driving through the Pennine town of Todmorden when he witnessed a strange object in the road.
It was something you've only read about or seen on television. And suddenly, it's there in front of you. It was just something out of a science fiction film. It was totally unbelievable.
PC Godfrey had no rational explanation for what he'd seen, or for what he discovered later.
I had this irritating itch on my foot. The boot on my left foot was split. If that's the sole of the, it was split that way. I've no idea why they were split, But when I took it off, I removed my sock, and it was on the instep of my foot, and it was a round circle like that, red. And it was very, very itchy. It wasn't sore, but it was very, very itchy.
At work the following day, Alan Godfrey received some surprising news. He hadn't been the only officer who claimed to have seen something strange the previous night.
I came on duty, and there was an inspector waiting to see me. I went into the inspector's office, and he then informed me that I wasn't alone, that 3 police officers in Halifax, in fact, had had some sort of an encounter the same night. And he was putting a report together, and he wanted a statement of me. Coming out of the inspector's office thinking, yeah, right on.
12 miles from Todmorden, on the moors above Halifax, PC's John Porter, Howard Turnpenny and Julie Baxter had been looking for stolen motorbikes. What they witnessed compelled them to make an official report.
We parked up, got out, walked down over the fields towards the quarries, and we nearly reached the quarries. And then something, nothing verbally, but something told us to turn. And we turned and just stood. And in the sky was a very cold, and I would describe it as a cold steel blue light. Not flashing, but pulsating. And the hairs on my arms and my neck just stood up. I cannot tell you, in all honesty, how big this thing was, because there was no definite shape to it other than a pulsating steel blue ball. But wherever it went, it was very, very fast. As fast as I'm moving my hand now. A second. A second, a second, a second. And that's how fast it moved, with no noise.
Whiskey Delta 40 to Halifax Control.
Tried to speak to Halifax on the radio. Nothing. Absolutely dead. I wasn't frightened, I was intrigued as to what this was.
But for WPC Julie Baxter, the experience proved unsettling.
Julie was scared. There's no doubt about it. She made her feelings very plain. Scared. Howard was like me. He wanted to know what it was. He wanted to see this thing. And for no known reason, it shot off in a big overhead heart towards Todmorden. Whatever it was not of... I can't explain whatever of our making. It was something completely alien to my understanding.
And the night was getting even stranger. 2 traffic officers on the moors near Littleborough, 12 miles from both Alan Godfrey and the Halifax patrol, reported seeing a bright pulsating sphere hovering between 2 electricity pylons before it sped off over the hills. In all, 6 separate police officers had witnessed strange phenomena that night. But it was Alan Godfrey's story which caught the attention of both the local press and UFO investigators, many of whom descended on Todmorden in the wake of the sighting. In 1980, Jenny Randalls headed British UFO investigation group Bufora. She was born near Todmorden and has written about British UFO sightings for over 35 years.
The Alan Godfrey experience, when it happened, came at the culmination of a whole series of events during the preceding 3 or 4 months that had been occurring in and around that area. They'd been getting stranger and stranger.
The Pennines are the backbone of the United Kingdom. The area stretches from the Scottish borders to the Derbyshire Peaks, a distance of 250 miles. Throughout the 1970s, there have been dozens of reports of objects in the sky over Yorkshire and Lancashire. So numerous were the sightings, the area earned itself the name UFO Alley. John Sheard was a Yorkshire-based journalist reporting for both the local and national press.
This was a time when the whole nation was obsessed with UFO stories. We had reports almost every day up here, particularly in the Pennines. but also throughout the country and, in fact, throughout the world.
The late 1970s and early 80s were the heyday of UFO mania. The release of films like Star Wars and Close Encounters coincided with the doubling of reports of UFO sightings in Britain. For the time being, news of Alan Godfrey's close encounter had stayed within Todmorden, but it hadn't escaped the attentions of a group of UFO investigators led by Jenny Randalls.
When I first met Alan, he struck me immediately as being a very typical, no-nonsense Yorkshire bobby. He would not have reported something like this unless he was absolutely sure in his own mind that it was real.
Although there was little physical evidence to support his claims, Alan Godfrey did have a damaged boot.
There was a split across the bottom of his boot. There's no question at all that that happened because we were able to immediately photograph it and it was real.
There was also the sketch made at the time of the sighting.
You just have to try and make a value judgment when you put all the evidence together, what you believe about the credibility of the witness, what the sincerity of the witness's story is, how it holds together again and again over the years.
But for Andy Roberts, who has researched hundreds of British UFO sightings, the origin of what PC Godfrey witnessed is relatively straightforward.
My personal belief is that he went into some form of altered state of consciousness, whether you call it a trance or something like that. Something triggered that. In his narratives, when he's described what he saw, he always says when he was driving up to it, he thought it was a bus. Now, it's possible that was the point when he slipped into this altered state of consciousness. When he got near it, he was seeing it as a UFO. Interestingly, he describes it as having 2 rows of windows, quite like a bus, actually. And it was on a main road near a bus stop. So it's possible he saw a bus delivering mill workers or picking mill workers up, and in his altered state of consciousness, it had transformed into a UFO.
This object I saw was hovering off the ground, it had no wheels. It was of a metallic colour and it had black panelling and dark windows. And it certainly wasn't a bus. I know the difference between a bus and what I saw that night.
And what of the strange lights witnessed by police officers John Porter, Julie Baxter and Howard Turnpenny just minutes before Alan Godfrey's encounter? Could they have a perfectly rational, scientific explanation? Dr. Ian Griffin worked for NASA on the Hubble telescope project for a decade before returning to the UK to carry out research into the movement of asteroids. He now watches the night skies from his home observatory in Todmorden.
My view is that nearly every UFO that has ever been seen has some kind of explanation. And it's probably because people don't really understand what they're looking at that they just call it a UFO. The planet Venus is often mistaken for a UFO. This is because it's very bright and it's very close to the sun in the sky. So very often, if you don't know what you're looking at and you see this stonkingly bright light beaming towards you, you think, what on earth is that? Meteors are sometimes mistaken for UFOs as well, caused by a very fast-moving rock entering the Earth's atmosphere high up. As the rock moves through the atmosphere, it ionises it and causes the gas atoms to glow in different colours. The colours can be green, they can be blue, and sometimes they can even be an orangey red colour.
There are other phenomena which may have existed for as long as the Pennines themselves, and which stem from more natural causes. Could these be the reason for the many sightings in the area, including those of Alan Godfrey and the other police officers in 1980? Dr. David Clark undertook a major study of the area, known as Project Pennine. It described naturally occurring phenomena that ranged from glowing hillsides to bizarre balls of light.
It's known that lights have been seen and reported by people following major earthquakes and earth tremors around the world. So we were interested in checking out whether similar correlations could be made with the lights that had been seen on a regular basis in the Pennines of northern England. Basically, you've got underground huge rock movements going on and rocks crushing against each other and electrons escaping from that movement. People have described seeing these light forms as following valleys or appearing above electricity pylons or even apparently pacing cars. But what may be happening here is that these lights are actually following fault lines or magnetic variations in the local area, and that those movements are interpreted by people who see them as being intelligent, as if it's a piloted craft of some description.
In November 1980, PC John Porter and his fellow officers had reported seeing a bright object moving at incredibly high speed. Could it have been a naturally occurring light, or something man-made?
Aircraft can actually cause UFO sightings too. Oftentimes they'll have lights that flash under the wings, and viewed from certain angles they can appear to be coming straight towards you or whizzing across the sky relatively quickly. So it's not unknown for an aircraft to cause a UFO sighting.
We've all seen aircraft in the sky at night. I've been on nights many years as a police officer. I've seen all sorts moving in the sky. But on this occasion, whatever it was not an aircraft. It was not. There's no way it was an aircraft. Moving too fast and no noise.
Air traffic records, both civilian and military, revealed that there were no flights in the area at the time. Routinely, official police reports of UFO sightings would be passed to the Ministry of Defence. As part of the Freedom of Information Act, they've now been released. Dr. David Clark has been researching official reports into UFO sightings for over 20 years.
When the Ministry of Defence files on UFOs from 1980 were opened, I went to the National Archives and immediately went looking for any mention of the sightings in Todmorden in 1980. And straight away I found a copy of the report by the police officers from Halifax, PC John Porter and his colleagues, who'd seen a bright blue ball of light in the sky. But there was absolutely no trace of the report that was made by Alan Godfrey the same night, about 30 minutes later. Maybe they just thought that his sighting was a bit too weird and a bit too disturbing, you know, to pass it on to the ministry.
But Alan Godfrey and John Porter were not the first police officers to have made an official report of a UFO sighting. Over the last 3 decades, police officers have contributed to a large proportion of British UFO reports. Gary Heseltine runs a database of UFO sightings made by both serving and retired police officers.
It's my belief that police officer testimony is of a very high calibre. There is no reason to think that these officers are mistaken because of their training, and I believe that police officer testimony should be regarded very highly in the world of the way we treat UFOs.
Police officers do see quite a lot of UFOs, and that's because they spend an awful lot of time out at night, often by themselves, often in remote areas like up on moors, industrial estates, places where there are not much ground light. You can see things in the sky. So anything that's up there, explicable or inexplicable, will be seen by police officers.
Between 1970 and 2000 alone, there were more than 700 UFO sightings made by serving police officers.
Clearly, police officers aren't going to make an official report about something they've seen in the sky in a frivolous way. It's not something that they would do lightly, because it has all kinds of impacts upon their career and whether they're taken seriously or not.
15th of August 1975, 2 uniformed police officers observed a bright lighted UFO heading in the direction of Hayward. A uniformed officer saw a huge UFO. 2 on-duty uniformed police officers, including a Chief Superintendent Hobson, were en route. 2:15 hours, Crofton, Wakefield, West Yorkshire. PC Patrick Tunney was checking on a couple of shops during the early hours of a winter's morning when he suddenly noticed 3 green lights approaching from around a mile distant.
Wakefield lies on the very edge of the Pennines, 30 miles from Todmorden. At the time of his sighting in 1976, PC Patrick Tunney was a well-respected police officer with over 20 years' experience.
I thought at first it was an helicopter having trouble, and we were looking at it. I thought, there's no noise, no engine noise, nothing. Just these 3 lights drifting towards me at about, say, between 100 and 150 feet high. The next minute, it didn't slow down, it didn't increase, and suddenly it turned to its left, and then it accelerated at a speed I've never seen up go that fast in my life. All it was a streak of light, and that was it, gone.
Could what PC Tunney saw have been an aircraft, meteor, or even a naturally occurring ball of light? And could any of these account for what Alan Godfrey claimed to have experienced in November 1980? Whatever the explanation, within a few months, Alan Godfrey's story would take a much more bizarre turn. After police officer Alan Godfrey reported an encounter with a strange object in West Yorkshire in 1980, some researchers claimed it to be a landmark in British UFO history.
After Alan Godfrey's experience had happened, we were immediately aware that this had cemented the importance of the Pennine area as the hotspot for UFO activity in Britain, and in fact probably the most active location for UFO encounters anywhere in Europe.
18 months before Alan Godfrey's sighting, mysterious bright orange lights had been reported speeding across the night skies of Lancashire. At 2 a.m. on the morning of February the 24th, 1979, Mike Sachs was at home in the village of Stacksteads, getting ready for bed.
All of a sudden, the room lit. The light was moving. I rushed to the window to be confronted with this huge ovoid, about 8-10 foot across, light, all diffused around the edges. It was pulsing, brilliant to intense, very orangey white. There was no sound. I remember that distinctly. We were in awe at this. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. It slowly descended out of sight into the quarry. It went through my mind, they do exist. These things do exist.
And Mike Sachs wasn't the only witness to the mysterious object. Local farmer Alf Kime, then 19, was out working with another farmhand when he too saw something strange in the sky.
We thought we were a shooting star flying down, and this building blocked it, so we shot past the building to see it. Like amazing, really, because it was the size of 2 double-decker buses, and it was sort of like spinning round, like changing colours, a lot of orange, and it went right across the skyline, right over the valley, then right over the valley, and it went over, over top of houses, right over to quarry. And I thought, somebody must see that, even though it were late. I thought somebody must see it. We can't be the only ones to see this. I immediately phoned Bacup Police, reported what I'd seen, and they said, right. He said, well, 2 of our police officers have also phoned in. They were parked up just below the quarry, and they reported it. I phoned my brother Raymond. I went up for him. We came back to the quarry, where the Panda car was still parked there. And I said, did you see it? And he said, see it? We thought it were coming down on our blooming heads.
There you go.
So we decided then to go up to the quarry. Now the police officers went up with us. But there was nothing to be seen.
By 3 a.m, Alf Kime had arrived home.
When we got back that night, my dad said, is everything all right? The cow's all right? And I said, yeah, everything's perfect. I said, but we've seen a flying saucer or something to that description. And he said, don't, somebody daft. What have you been smoking? And obviously he was laughing to himself. And he said, have you been drinking? And Mike shouted out, no, he said, we've actually seen it. We've seen some of it anyway. He said, all right, I'll see you in the morning then.
That night, between 2:30 and 2:50 a.m, there were a dozen separate sightings reported throughout Lancashire and as far west as Merseyside. The reports varied from fiercely bright orange orbs to the oval-shaped craft seen by Mike Sachs and Alf Kime.
The following week, when it's out in local free press, you didn't feel as daft as really telling, because we told this story, and you could see people didn't believe you when you were telling it, because, I don't think I'd believe it myself, really.
If the oval-shaped craft seemed inexplicable, what were the bright orange lights seen shooting across the sky that night? Astronomer Dr. Ian Griffin may have one explanation.
Since the dawn of the space age, several thousand objects have been launched into space, and the re-entry of a satellite can cause a bright flash of light in the sky. And certainly big satellites, for example, Skylab in the late 1970s, or the Mir station in the 1990s, when they entered the Earth's atmosphere, they looked like tremendous fireballs with bits breaking off. So oftentimes, yes, space junk can cause UFO sightings.
For many skeptics, the explanation for the sightings is even more straightforward. The Pennines has two busy civilian airports situated at its edge.
There was a huge explosion of air travel in the 70s and 80s, and that led to the expansion of Manchester Airport, of Leeds Bradford Airport, and international aeroplanes. Now, the Pennines, quite wild, it's very dark at night, and if you see an aircraft in the sky through unusual weather conditions or coming into land or taking off, its beams, its light configuration can appear very, very strange. And I think that's largely been the result of why there have been so many UFO sightings over the Pennines from the 1970s onwards.
When it comes to UFO sightings over the Pennines, or anywhere else for that matter, we can readily explain away 99% more as mistaken identity. But it leaves that niggling little number every time that no matter how much research, no matter how much you try, you can't get rid of these particular cases. And after a lot of legwork, they still remain unexplained.
There was another possible explanation, that the lights in the sky being witnessed that night were connected with some secret Cold War military operation. After some of his constituents had reported seeing the lights, the MP for Ormskirk even raised the question in Parliament. On the 12th of June 1979, the Ministry of Defence issued a statement. It said that a US Air Force exercise had taken place between the 21st and 24th of February, during which fighter aircraft had been flying at very low levels throughout the British Isles. Were both Alf Keim and Mike Sachs simply witnesses to a routine military manoeuvre?
We get many aircraft flying over the valley, all different shapes and sizes, air cargo, passenger, military. This was totally unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. I can only conclude, and I don't say this lightly, it is extraterrestrial.
We can never rule out military technology, but I think in this case it looks as if something genuinely unidentified was present in the Pennines that night.
Whatever the source of the strange lights seen over Lancashire, PC Alan Godfrey's experience continued to fascinate the UFO community. After Alan Godfrey's sighting in Todmorden, he claimed to have lost some 30 minutes in time. The only physical evidence of his encounter, a damaged boot and a sketch he'd made at the time. In an attempt to find out more, UFO investigators suggested a radical idea.
They contacted me and asked me, would I be willing to go under hypnotic regression? I declined straight away. I wasn't sure, I thought, what is hypnotic regression? The only hypnosis I'd ever seen was on television, on a stage, where they make fun of you.
Eventually, Alan Godfrey was persuaded to undergo hypnosis, which was conducted by two psychiatrists, Dr. Jaffe and Professor Blair.
They wouldn't tell either of the psychiatrists what the subject matter was. They would only tell them that it was a policeman who they were going to try to regress to a certain time on a certain date to an incident that may or may not have happened.
Mike Sachs, whose interest in UFOs had been sparked by his own experiences the previous year, was present at the sessions.
The atmosphere in the room was absolutely electric as Alan is relating this series of events. All of a sudden, and under hypnosis, he goes and covers his eyes. Then somehow he's floating and he's taken into this room.
I have no recollection whatsoever what went on during that hypnotic regression.
Under hypnosis, Alan Godfrey's claims grew more bizarre. Not only had he witnessed a UFO, he'd also come into contact with alien beings. In UFO terminology, he had been abducted.
We were actually present, possibly one of the first abduction cases that has happened in the UK.
Whatever Alan Godfrey had experienced in November 1980, and whatever had happened to the missing 30 minutes, the latest revelations seem scarcely credible.
UFO abductions, very big in America, not so big in Britain. A handful of people allegedly being abducted by UFOs. So when you get a policeman seeing a UFO, later coming out under hypnosis with the story he was abducted, you've got something that's quite solid there, and people have latched onto it as being, you know, a real event.
I'm asking myself, did that really happen? No, I couldn't have done. I don't believe it. But why am I saying it?
Psychologist Chris French has conducted several studies in the area of so-called paranormal experiences.
There are a number of different factors which seem to play a role in people reporting that they've had an alien abduction experience. Very often there is some initial triggering event, like, say, an episode of sleep paralysis or missing time, that leads people to believe they may have been abducted by aliens. What's probably happening is that they are getting confused between things that are happening in here and things that are happening in external reality. And basically, as a result, they're having sometimes hallucinatory experiences, sometimes false memories, but that's leading them to believe that they've had these alien encounters.
But it wasn't just Alan Godfrey's supposed abduction that intrigued ufologists. The investigators also discovered a connection to another unsolved local mystery, one they believed could have extraterrestrial origins. 6 months before his UFO sighting, Alan Godfrey and colleague Malcolm Agley had received a call about a body found at a local coal yard.
He received a radio message that found a body at Todmorden railway station, so I attended with PC Alan Godfrey.
Well, someone instinctively tells you there's something not right. You know, you come across dead bodies all the time, it sounds like, but you do. And it was lying on his back, just staring up into the sky.
There's no disturbance of the call, you know, to say how he got there. We just can't explain it at all.
And it was being treated as a crime scene. I think everybody at that stage thought it was a crime. That's how obvious it was. Why would a man climb a stack of coal, lie down on his back on top and die?
The body was that of a Polish émigré named Zygmunt Adamski, a former miner who'd moved to the UK after the Second World War and had settled in Wakefield, 20 miles from where he was found.
To me, I don't think he died there. I think he'd been put there. It looked to me as if he had anyway.
The evidence was inconclusive.
You'd expect if somebody had been lying on the belly or had climbed up the coal, it'd be covered in coal dust. It'd been raining, it'd stick to him like glue. There was no visual coal on him, on the front of him, anywhere. Either on his face or anything. And he had these black marks that transpired to be burn marks round the back of the head. And there was one at the nape of the neck here, like an open wound, like a blistering wound, and it had had an ointment applied to it.
We just thought it was strange, you know, that he had these injuries and this sort of green ointment, which looked nothing I've seen before at all, you know. It just seemed strange and a bit unnatural, really.
Zygmunt Adamski had gone missing after a shopping trip. There was no suggestion that he'd planned to disappear, and he was known as a loving family man with no obvious enemies. The autopsy confirmed that Adamski had died of a heart attack. Coroner James Turnbull was mystified, not least by the strange substance found on Adamski's burns.
We had the substance analysed, and the toxicologists and the scientists couldn't come up with any answers to what it was. And we came up against a blank at every line of investigation. This was one of the most puzzling cases that I've come across in 25 years. If somebody proved to me that UFOs exist and that there was one around there at that time, and that in some way we could associate it with this case, then perhaps I might say I'd only raise half an eyebrow.
Whatever the truth behind Adamski's death, which remains unsolved, Alan Godfrey's association with it was to turn him into a UFO celebrity. In November 1980, PC Alan Godfrey had witnessed a mysterious object whilst on patrol in Todmorden.
If I'd have got out the car and thrown a brick at it, it would have gone clang. That's how real it was.
Alan Godfrey was also connected to a mysterious death, which remains unsolved after almost 30 years. Zygmunt Adamski had gone missing in June 1980. His body had been found 5 days later, lying on top of a coal heap in Todmorden. At the inquest, Coroner James Turnbull was mystified, recording an open verdict and even suggesting a link with UFOs.
I did nearly 27 years in the police, and it's the one thing that I've never really got to the bottom of, and it is bizarre, and it's always been there at the back of my mind. There's just no explanation for it at all.
Nobody has ever been charged in relation to the death of Zygmunt Adamski, and the strange ointment which covered his burns has never been identified.
To this day, we don't know whether or not there actually is any connection with the Adamski death. The case is still unsolved. They've never found out how his body got onto the top of that coal heap.
Some UFO researchers looked at all the pieces of the puzzle. You know, the fact that he was put on a coal tip, and how did he get there? It's mysterious. And they just jumped to the most massive of conclusions that, you know, the only explanation must be that he's been abducted by aliens and something's gone wrong.
The Adamski story was picked up by Sunday Mirror journalist John Sheard. Although more used to covering Northern Ireland and the trial of the Yorkshire Ripper, he recognised the opportunity for an exclusive.
I sat down and tried to write it as straight as I could. I didn't want it to sound over-sensational, because it was already a very sensational story. What I didn't know was that when it hit the streets that Sunday, as the front page lead, was the incredible reaction that would happen. I'm talking about literally thousands of letters, hundreds of phone calls. I began to realise that this was a story that, even though I was still a bit iffy about it, had gripped millions of people throughout the world.
John Sheard soon discovered PC Alan Godfrey's involvement with the Adamski case, and the later claims made under hypnosis that he'd been the subject of an alien abduction.
I've been a journalist for 50 years and covered quite a few rather strange stories, but the Alan Godfrey story is undoubtedly the most astonishing thing I ever covered. What made Alan's story so special from my point of view was the fact that A, he was a serving policeman, and one expects them to be fairly straightforward in recording facts. And of course it came on the heels of the Adamski story and a very strange inquest. Individually, they were good pieces, but when you add the two together and a possible connection, you've got dynamite.
At the time, Alan Godfrey's story captured the public imagination. Whatever the truth behind it, it's become one of Britain's classic UFO cases.
I've got no doubt that Alan's UFO experience was to him real. Whether it was objectively real is a different kettle of fish altogether. We can all have experiences which we believe are real to us, and they can happen some form of lucid dreaming, for instance, hallucinatory states, fugue states, trance states. They're all real to the person, but that's a subjective reality, not an objective reality.
On the moors above Halifax, former police officer John Porter is meeting Alan Godfrey. Both reported seeing something unexplained on the night of the 28th of November 1980.
Are you?
I'm all right, you're getting grey.
Hey, you still got yours, haven't you?
Yeah, I know, but it's stuck on.
Yeah.
It was only when I found out about you lads that it made me feel a lot more comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, because...
I can understand that.
Do you know what I'm on about?
3 of us can't be wrong.
3 of you can't be wrong.
3 of us cannot be wrong. 3 of us saw what we saw.
Exactly. Now, I was on my own.
Yeah.
And I've been told I would hallucinate.
I've been,
whatever.
I've had all this.
And another one. I was told I'd fallen asleep at the wheel.
Absolutely.
And I'm driving, but you know what I mean. I'm driving.
I know.
I mean, I'd only left the police station 5 minutes earlier. You know.
Alan has never changed his story. He's a very down-to-earth gentleman, and he had more to lose than to gain by relating such an incident. And that's why Alan's story goes down as a classic close encounter from the UK.
The Pennines continue to be fertile ground for strange phenomena. The numbers of reported UFO sightings are nowhere near those of the late 1970s and 80s, but they do still happen.
If you look at the number of sightings that have been reported over the years, you know, we appear to be absolutely swamped with aliens. You know, that the whole planet must be swarming with their ships as they're racing across the universe to visit us. It simply does not add up.
I have not come across a UFO that cannot be explained when you go through the various things that it possibly could be. If you know the sky, you can understand what you're seeing.
But for many who experienced their own close encounter, the passing of time hasn't diminished the impact.
I have to say, after this experience, in all honesty, I believe there's something out there other than us.
Every night I go out, I'm looking up, and I've never seen anything since, but, you know, it is there. There's no doubt about it.
Where they come from, why they're here, I wouldn't know, but they are here.
Alan Godfrey left the police force in 1985. Almost 30 years on, he's still sticking to his story.
It's 28 years ago, and I still believe in what I saw was really there.
They've brains that work like human computers. Their description, not mine. Meet Flo and Kay next here on 5, identical twins who are also artistic savants and extraordinary people, the Rain Man twins.
By regulations, I decided, along with several other researchers, to file Freedom of Information requests with the Pentagon.
The Air Force document stated, quote, penetration of sensitive areas during the hours of darkness have prompted the implementation of Security Option 3 at our northern tier bases, unquote.
The reason this is so significant and interesting is that they seem to be focused on atomic weapons. These bases, because of what they stood for, there were massive retaliation capability, and therefore there were very high security bases. Whatever this was flying around could just penetrate all these defenses at will.
The important question, did the UFOs affect the missile's ability to launch?
Malmstrom Air Force Base had several intrusions near missile silos, one involving an object which, according to one witness, hovered over the silo and somehow managed to change the tracking numbers on the missile. According to the witness, the missile had to be removed and retooled to make it work again. And to see this, not in UFO books, but in government military messages, was a real eye-opener. And I think that if the public had known that at the time, there would have been great alarm.
About 10 years before, Air Force Lieutenant Robert Jacobs witnessed something remarkable.
Hair's going up on the back of my neck right now thinking about it, just remembering that day. I saw something that was so strange that it changed my life.
Jacobs was in charge of a special unit that filmed Minuteman and Atlas missiles during launch tests from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California.
So my job was to provide photographic documentation from 30 or 40 different camera positions for each launch. We walked onto the missile and we saw all 3 stages of powered flight.
The camera followed the missile through its successful flight.
Now what we didn't know is what else we had got besides the missile.
Soon after, project director Lorenz Mansman called Jacobs into his office.
There were two guys in gray suits in there, civilian clothes. They were not in the Air Force. They were from somewhere else. They never identified themselves. They could have been CIA, OSI, OSS.
All four of the men watched the film of the missile flight.
The nose cone spread out. The warhead was quite plainly visible. Something flew into the frame. What I saw was a circular object. It was a classic flying saucer. And it shot a beam of something at our warhead. You have to imagine this thing is flying along at several thousand miles an hour. This stuff is flying along, and something comes into the frame and chasing it. And comes in like this and fires at it, and goes around like this and fires at it, and goes around like this and fires at it, and fires at it like this, and then goes back out that way. What the hell could do that?
Suddenly, Jacobs was in the hot seat.
And he said, "What was that?" And I said, "It looks to me like we got a UFO." And he said, "You are never to say that again. As far as you're concerned, Lieutenant Jacobs, this never happened." And I was sworn to silence, reminded of the severity of a security breach, and told to leave the room.
After keeping silent for many years, Jacobs went public. The Air Force responded with complete denial.
The Air Force denied that I was ever there.
Despite the existence of the film, the Air Force denied that Jacobs was in charge of the Special Photo Unit. They even denied he was in the Air Force at the time.
They denied everything.
Records reveal that Jacobs was in the Air Force, that he was in charge of the photo unit, and that he was filming that day. Major Mansman, his commanding officer who screened the film with him, wrote a letter confirming Jacobs' account of the UFO.
The Air Force is probably not going to like this film, but there's nothing they can do about it. It exists. It documents the telescope, the people who were there, including me. And if there are any ramifications about it, I guess I just don't care anymore.
Next on Unexplained Mysteries, is there a connection between top-secret black projects and UFO sightings?
Certainly some of these things are going to look very strange. They're very unlike aircraft with which people are familiar.
Is the military using alien technology in its black projects?
I think the technology at Area 51 originally came from somewhere else.
And what happens to people who want to get close to Area 51?
I think that could be the biggest and perhaps the last mistake they are going to make in their life.
We'll show you why NASA terminated its own probe that was getting information to life on Mars.
They said that NASA or the government might want to consider keeping the information from the public.
And the government abruptly stopped its search for extraterrestrial life.
For certain people, that's not something that they want to either believe in or allow anybody to know that they believe in.
We'll expose what the government does to military officers who report UFOs.
I got letters from high-ranking officers that they had no record of such an aircraft ever existing.
And we'll sum up the UFO conspiracy in our UNX report. There's much more to come on Unexplained Mysteries. Undercover UFOs. Black projects. That's the name for secret military development efforts.
Certainly some of these things are going to look very strange. They're very unlike aircraft with which people are familiar.
There seems to be a connection between black projects and UFO sightings.
Well, certainly the history of the flying saucer phenomena suggests that in the past, classified programs resulted in a lot of reports of flying saucers. And if you see all of the instances where conventional aircraft have been misinterpreted as flying saucers, it's quite easy to understand how unconventional aircraft could receive a similar misinterpretation.
In the Nevada desert, we have things out there that are literally out of this world.
Groom Lake, Nevada, also known as Area 51, where experts believe the military is working on top-secret projects.
They have a hangar near the south end of the ramp that appears to have doors that are almost 200 feet tall, 400 feet wide. You can put anything in there. One of the problems associated with Groom Lake is the fact that it is a place that does not officially exist.
Area 51 is the most tightly secured installation in this country. It's guarded both over the air and on the ground by elite Air Force security police and Department of Energy special response teams. If someone came to me and said there's just absolutely nothing that's secret, and they decided they were going to hike into Area 51, I think that could be the biggest and perhaps the last mistake they are going to make in their life.
There are rumors of a secret project called Aurora, in which the Air Force is said to be inventing a craft using highly advanced technology.
I think there's a strong possibility that we have recovered some sort of alien technology and are trying to incorporate that into military programs.
Are they really hiding something that's totally alien? Is this otherworldly technology that's being applied to Air Force black projects?
Sonic booms have been reported in Los Angeles, evidence of high-speed, unidentified craft. They've been traced back to Groom Lake, Nevada.
We really can't tell what's moving. The only thing we see is a sonic boom, and that's telling us that something is moving faster than the speed of sound. So actually, we can't even tell it's an airplane.
The military maintains its position of denial.
Every time that there's a story about Aurora or the TR-3A Black Manta in the Popular Science or the New York Times or something else, Congress calls the Pentagon on the carpet and says, what's the deal? They want to know if these planes exist. And every time they've asked about those planes, they've been told there is no such thing.
The military's established a pattern of denial concerning these highly capricious wild aircraft beginning in the late 50s and continuing to this day.
2 UFO experts investigated Area 51 up close. They saw several red-orange objects in the sky.
They started at great height, seemed to descend, and then flared out. It was startling. Then a series of silver pewter flashes went directly across the horizon at terrific speed. One of these silver flashes went directly up into the air. The bottom one seemed nearly to hug the ground.
When they tried to leave the base, they were stopped by security.
Boom. Headlights come on. There was an M16 pointed at us. And here we were faced with a life and death situation. But we also knew that we had crossed the line back into public domain, and therefore we were saved.
3 months later, Mark Farmer saw the same red-orange flying objects.
I saw the object exhibit entirely unconventional flight characteristics. At times it would wobble around in the sky and appear very unstable. At other times it would be in a rock-hard hover. It was an oblated sphere, multicolored, crimson on bottom, blue-green on top, much brighter than anything else in the sky.
Robert Lazar, the aerospace engineer who worked at Area 51, is convinced that these objects were experimental Air Force craft developed from alien technology. He claims there are at least 9 flying saucers stored there.
I was part of a back engineering group, and our job was basically to look at these recovered discs, and I say recovered because I don't know really where they came from. Whether they were given to us, we found them, shot them down, who knows what. But our group basically was to back engineer them, which means to start with a finished product and go backward and see how it was fabricated, and try and duplicate some of that technology with earthly materials.
To me, Bob Lazar is credible. Over the past couple of years, I've spoken to literally dozens of people who have worked at that facility out there in Nevada. I think the technology at Area 51 originally came from somewhere else.
The military disavows any knowledge of the alien technology program.
I don't think the military has any credibility with the public in terms of its denials of this program or that program. They've denied the U-2 existed, they denied the SR-71 existed, they denied working on stealth. All of those programs suddenly were unveiled.
Coming up on Unexplained Mysteries, the destruction of one of NASA's most valuable space probes. Was it intentional?
It did not lose transmission. They turned it off.
The promising search for extraterrestrial intelligence that the government ended abruptly.
if our government knew that we got signal from outer space, they'd clamp a lid on it.
The mysterious UFO sightings on the ground at MacDill Air Force Base.
It was nearly 100 feet across.
The military headquarters for a secret UFO intelligence team.
Wright-Patterson had something unique to our government, and that was the Technical Intelligence Organization.
And the government's refusal to divulge UFO secrets.
A lot of people say, well, how can something be kept secret? The F-117 stealth fighter was kept secret for approximately 10 years.
And you'll get the ultimate rundown with our UNX report. More secrets, more revelations. Next on Unexplained Mysteries. Unexplained Mysteries, Undercover UFOs. The government's cover-up of alien life extends to other planets. The unmanned Mars Observer was packed with sensitive data-gathering equipment. But it never completed its mission. NASA blamed the failure on technical malfunction. But experts think there's more to NASA's story. It starts with a strange area on the red planet known as Cydonia.
It's quite possible that NASA knows more about anomalous structures on Mars, possible extraterrestrials, even structures on our moon that they're not telling us about.
There is sufficient evidence to indicate that some of the objects on Mars may possibly be artificial.
NASA says the objects on Mars are just light and shadow. But 3D imaging reveals something startling.
I was quite interested with the first photos and release of the face on Mars. But particularly I thought it was interesting the pyramidal structures. Some of these pyramids appear to have even a central stairway running up and down them. The more we look at these structures, the more we can see that there's something amazing here.
Did NASA create a convenient malfunction to hide archaeological evidence of alien life?
If some people want to go far beyond the edge of what's accepted in terms of imagery, see patterns on the rocks of Mars or on the moon or in the rings of Saturn, my view to that is mazel tov. Go ahead, do it. Try it out. Make the proposals.
These objects, if you measure carefully from the tops of the 5 that surround this city square point, you find an almost perfectly symmetrical pentagon.
The Brookings Institution prepared a report for NASA. It contains a shocking recommendation.
There is a section on what might occur if evidence of extraterrestrial existence was found on other planets. They said that NASA or the government might want to consider keeping the information from the public. The reason being that it could cause widespread social unrest and possible deterioration of government control.
NASA claims the observer had an electrical failure.
It did not lose transmission. They turned it off. And they turned it off after the instructions for going into orbit had been uploaded to the spacecraft. It was possible then that the spacecraft would go ahead, follow out those instructions, and go into orbit.
Before we start saying how these rocket scientists messed up, and they did mess up, we have to keep realizing just how tough these projects are. That we're doing things out there in space every time we do it that no one even thought was possible a few years or decades ago.
The search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Huge radio telescopes aimed at the sky. Their purpose? To capture radio signals from alien civilizations. But the program is shrouded in secrecy.
I think if our government knew that we got signals, a dedicated signal from outer space somewhere, they'd clamp a lid on it.
Our source, a space program engineer, knows the risks.
If the powers that be knew I was talking to you, there would be a high price for me to pay.
After years of denying the existence of UFOs, the government abruptly decides to spend millions on searching for aliens. But there's a catch.
It's very hard to believe that the government would allow something this extraordinary to be released to the general public without scrutiny and censorship.
In the Mojave Desert, the government set up Goldstone Station on a military base.
It's RF quiet, which means there's not a lot of background noise when they're looking for signals. It's really ideal for this type of search.
Soon after coming online, the telescopes picked up signals called hits.
There were hits that were taken seriously. There were 3-4 hits, to my knowledge, that were strong, and it could potentially be a signal from an extraterrestrial intelligence.
Then, the government suddenly shut down the program.
It was a cheap shot for the budget posers, for the so-called deficit hawks. It's always easier to make fun of something that you or enough of your constituents don't understand.
But some experts take issue with that explanation.
If they embrace the concept of looking for alien signals, they also have to acknowledge the fact that the alien signals are coming from an extraterrestrial intelligence somewhere. And for certain people, that's not something that they want to either believe in or allow anybody to know that they believe in.
Some people believe the National Security Agency killed SETI because it feared the public would panic.
Their history and action in the past is a good warning of what they would do if something like this happened.
SETI was resurrected by several major corporations and renamed Project Phoenix. But the government maintained a strong, though unpublicized, presence.
If the hits do come down, they will be suppressed, and I don't think anybody will take a chance. The government would never make that leap of faith that the public would be able to handle the fact that we are receiving intelligence signals from another race, creature, something from somewhere else.
Next on Unexplained Mysteries, the Air Force officer who saw a number of UFOs.
My gosh, those are flying saucers. Those things really do exist.
Or were they experimental military planes?
A lot of people say they're from deep space, but they could just as easily be from this world.
Find out how the military dealt with questions about the aircraft.
They had no record of such an aircraft ever existed.
And we get to the truth about the UFO conspiracy in the UNX Report, next on Unexplained Mysteries. Unexplained Mysteries Undercover UFOs. Reports are increasing of UFOs spotted at air bases, but with a striking difference. These craft are on the ground. MacDill Air Force Base, Florida, 1967. An officer witnesses an inconceivable sight.
We were near a restricted area of the base, and all of a sudden we saw 4 aircraft parked out there, and our immediate reaction to each other was, my gosh, those are flying saucers. Those things really do exist.
Pickett published the Air Force Base newspaper. He wanted to do an article about the craft he'd seen, including photos.
I was called up to the Adjutant General's office. He went over to a file cabinet and got out a whole bunch of photographs. And he proceeded to lay these photographs out on a large table so that I could look at them. Well, of course, my interest perked up instantly when I began to see literally hundreds of photographs of all types of quote-unquote flying saucers.
The Air Force refused to allow Pickett to publish the article. That night, eyewitnesses in Miami reported a large number of UFO sightings. At the airbase the next day, the flying saucers were gone. The images have haunted Pickett for years. Desperate for some kind of explanation, he recently contacted former Air Force intelligence officer George Filer.
A lot of people say, well, how can something be kept secret for 50 years? Well, I point out that the F-117 stealth fighter was kept secret for approximately 10 years. And most of us didn't know that it existed until the government released the information.
I pointedly asked him, not only are these where the flying saucers stories came from, is this what they were? And he said, yes. Well, I was awestruck. I couldn't really believe I was seeing what I was seeing. Some of those photographs had many, many aircraft in them, and they were all easily identifiable, as Air Force photographs are, And I asked him, well, how high and how fast could these things go? You hear all these stories. And he said, well, this particular aircraft could go fast enough and high enough to actually achieve space flight. And I had no idea when he was telling me this story that it wouldn't be too long before they were declared non-existent.
To this day, Pickett is determined to prove what he saw was real.
This is an illustration of one of the largest ones parked down. In fact, it was the largest. It was nearly 100 feet across.
But when Pickett tried recently to get the photographs and documentation of the craft, the Air Force said no.
When I initially wrote, I began to get answers back. They didn't have the faintest idea what I was talking about. I got letters from high-ranking officers that they had no record of such an aircraft ever existing. So I knew that it was top secret again.
Many UFO experts believe the technology for the saucer-shaped aircraft came from an alien spaceship that crashed near Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. At that time, if the military had recovered a downed UFO, they would have transported it to Wright-Patterson Air Base in Ohio.
Wright-Patterson had something unique to our government, and that was the Technical Intelligence Organization, so-called T2, or what became the Foreign Technology Division. This is the sort of division that would have been appropriate to use for the investigation of UFO.
This colonel is a real warrior type guy, and he had a degree in plasma physics. And he was also a consultant to NASA, and he was a consultant to people out at the Palos Verdes nuclear power generating station just 50 miles west of Phoenix. And there were a couple of things that he mentioned. I went up directly to him to ask whether he had ever worked in underground facilities. And I asked him this cold, and he just looked up at me and said, "Which one?" I said, "I don't know, you tell me." And he said, "Well, I used to ride the Lev." I said, "Pardon me?" I said, "What did you say? A Lev? Do you mean a mag Lev?" And he said, yeah, maglev. And then he started raving about how Clinton knew nothing about this, and Clinton wasn't a military man, and he had no need to know about what was going on underground. And he said the entrance to the system that he took was into White Sands Proving Grounds. The other thing he said was there was a base on the moon. I find that quite astounding. I mean, I have heard astounding things, not only from this colonel, okay, but also probably the highest rank was a retired 3-star general, lieutenant general in the Air Force. And he knew another guy that I was in contact with, and this other guy claims that he worked 7 years on the U.S. anti-gravity program. I have a fraction of what he told me, and I've got it tape recorded. It's true. Whoa. What a sham the space program is. Because there's another space program going on. A secret space program. And that's what I was attempting to find. In fact, you don't have to go too far to find that there is some secret space programs going on, because they had their own shuttles and their own astronaut crews right out here at Vandenberg Air Force Base, unbeknownst to everybody, and they scuttled a $5 billion facility that was housed there at one time. That was back in the 80s. But the kind of space program he was talking about is using a spacecraft that can leave the bounds of our atmosphere and travel to the planet Mars at 0.8 C. 0.8 the speed of light. And I said, how do you know that? I've been there, he said.
Yes, Bill, could you just elaborate a little more on the trips to Mars that you had mentioned earlier?
That this man who told me this, by the way, verified he is an aerospace engineer. I cannot verify that he's also a physicist except by his writings, and I have some of his papers. And he claimed to work shoulder to shoulder with a race of human-like beings just like us. I forgot where he said they were from, if it really matters, but it was these people who were guiding him through the... He wasn't back engineering so much as he was on trying to explain the physics of what the engineers were doing. He was investigating the physics of it with the assistance of these beings, so he claimed. And he worked in underground facilities at Nevada Test Site, China Lake, Edwards Air Force Base, maybe other places. And when I asked him this question, or I put this question to him, he said that he had been on this craft, had gone to Mars, and I asked him, where did you go? Where did you land? And he said, we went underground on Mars. And there was a base there where they landed. And he would not describe the base, who put it there, or whether it was our base. Nothing. He shut up about that. But in order to just evoke a little bit more information out of him, I asked the question, are there Martians? And there was a real pregnant pause before he replied, and he simply said, yes. And I said, and what do they look like? Now get this, he said, like the ancient Egyptians. Now there's a book out, I find this fascinating, by Graham Hancock, just recently put out, about the connection between the planet Mars and Egypt. Is somebody onto something here? I don't know, but I think that's quite a coincidence, because there were people wandering around in the 1950s here in California telling me they had met Martians, and they had olive skin, dark hair, dark complected. I don't know how many of those stories. They were never little grays. They were always human. Yet we don't see any cities on Mars, not the canals. We know the atmosphere is carbon dioxide. It's very thin. Where do they live? But we do know that Mars once had apparently abundant water on its surface and probably had conditions that could support life. So if there are people on Mars, maybe they do live underground. Who knows?
scheduled to land on September 4th, 1,000 miles to the northeast of Viking 1. How will Viking go about looking for life on Mars? We asked Dr. Richard Young, NASA's chief of planetary biology.
We look for life on Mars in much the same way we would look for life on Earth if we were forced to use an automated device. You know, we don't send a scientist along. If we were sending a little wagon out into the Sahara Desert or one of the dry valleys of the Antarctic, which had to function all by itself with automated equipment, this is probably exactly what we would send. And let me say, by the way, that we're looking primarily for microorganisms. It would be rather fruitless of us to look for horses on Mars. We wouldn't look for horses on Earth if we were looking for life, because the chances would be 1,000,000 to 1 against finding them with a random search.
Viking's mechanical arm pulls in a scoopful of Martian soil and drops it into a 1 cubic foot box that's really 3 completely automated testing laboratories. It is here that the possibilities for or against the presence of life will be determined. What will it mean to Earthlings if life is found on Mars?
It must mean that the universe is literally an inhabited universe with many planets that have life on it. Now, if there are many planets that have life on it, there is no doubt at all that terrestrial life is not going to be the most advanced civilization, the most highest level of consciousness. We must be somewheres in the broad spectrum of possibility. And that drives you to the conclusion that there may be conscious life elsewhere in the universe.